opposed to I have to somehow get away from him or it or the idea or the presence of. And I did that for a long time. You know, again, I said, I'm a third generation addict. I looked at my dad. My dad was an alcoholic. My dad was a drug addict. And when I say drug addict, like when I thought, like my dad was the crack cocaine guy. He was a functioning crackhead.
Oh, wow.
Like my dad was the guy that would hold a job in Washington, D.C. with the Small Business Administration, making great money.
Wait a minute. So when your dad was a corrections officer, he was on that
shit? No, not there.
Oh, okay.
Florida is the recovery space.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what happened. When he went to Florida, you knew you did not know crackhead daddy.
Okay.
You did not have to stay. You never got a ride home from a crackhead.
Okay.
I can promise you that right now.
Okay.
But I just share that because for him, when I saw him, what I saw was, oh my God, he's an alcoholic. He smokes cigarettes. He does drugs. He had relationships. Yeah, he had a kid outside the marriage. And as I got older, I said, well, as long as I don't do that and I flee that, then I'm going to end up good. And all that really happened was that I flee to something that didn't look like him, but it still gave me the same outcomes. And I just share that because there's a lot of people where, because of the childhood trauma they may have experienced or they have experienced, the mind says to escape, to flee, but we never address or resolve. And more often than not, if we actually address and resolve that space of trauma, instead of saying, hey, I completely rebuke, reject, and disavow this part of my life, we actually come across a learning opportunity in that space for us. You know, so instead of saying, that's how patterns continue. Like, believe it or not, that's how we look at generational habits, generational quote-unquote curses kind of deal, where we think we're doing something different, but we never resolve the past. So we always are going to repeat that in some other iteration. It won't look exactly like what we just came from. But it does give us another iteration of it if we never take the time to say, okay, wait a minute, I experienced, I felt, I needed, and how did I resolve that? So I just wanted to, I won't make this like switch to like a psychology therapy kind of deal or whatever, but I think when we're looking at parenting and we're looking at, and even in this case, I'll be more specific, when we're looking at fatherhood, you know, I think there's a general consensus that says that most trauma from our childhood, if you experience childhood trauma, your father was a participant in that process to some degree. You know, regardless of how it may have looked. He could have not emotionally connected with you, could have beat you, could have yelled at you, could have given you double standards, maybe was completely absent. It's a lot of ways that we end up seeing these connections. True. You know, so from one father speaking to another father, if we are both in this space of looking at the next generation come at us, we don't want to have a spot in our history or in our past that says this happened and all I did was move away from it. I never resolved it. Because that's how you keep the cycle going. You don't get a chance to interrupt the pattern that we have, not just in our own lives as an individual, but also what happens generationally out of that space as well. Because again, the data never fails. You know, when I look at my grandfather, he was an alcoholic. He was a womanizer. Now, was he a good man? Absolutely. I don't have my dad nor any of his siblings will ever say that, hey, he left us like this, or we never had this, or anything. They'll have all the great experiences and memories. But for each one, for my father and every sibling, they have all still had to deal with some version of the pattern. Even though they said I did something different. So whether it's his sisters coming across somebody and being in an emotionally unhealthy relationship, whether it's my dad who says, wait a minute, I'll be better than my dad because, you know what, maybe he was a drunk, but he was a drunk that didn't go to college. You know, he was a drunk that worked in a factory. I'm going to be the guy that can, quote unquote, handle his alcohol, and every accident is just that, an accident. It has nothing to do with drinking. And I'm going to go and present this. Me, I said almost the same thing. I said, look, screw this. I'm not going to be him. But what did the outcome say? Outcome say what? Damaged relationships in generation 1. Damaged relationships in generation 2. Damaged relationships in generation 3. Gap in connecting of generation 1 to generation 2. Gap of connecting parent and child from generation 2 to generation 3. And then I had to look and say, okay, what are my perceived gaps that I'm going to have right now that come out of this process, because I chose to not address, but I wanted to escape and I wanted to avoid.
Well,
so
a few more.
Share that part of this space of conversation. Go right ahead, bro.
A few more questions before we let you go. In that space and time, you know, because I had a very different experience than you and my wife. I knew at a young age, at a young age, I didn't want children. But by the time I got older and knew I wanted kids, I knew I didn't want to do it by myself. So with that being said, what did you as a father find the hardest part about being a single parent?
You know, the hardest part is actually the emotional, I'll say turmoil, because of the newness of it. It's a lot of spaces where we can say, you know what, financially it was difficult, or logistically it was difficult, or trying to get from work and traffic. Really, the hardest, the biggest thing that I struggled with wasn't in the space of logistics. It was always in the space of emotions. So in that space of emotions, again, what I'm wrestling with is, am I giving you something different than what I got? So even though I end up, in a sense, duplicating what my dad did, again, be your best friend or your work disciplinarian, I was the same way, but I thought I did it for a different objective.
So which were you, the best friend or...
I want to create stuff and spoil you and do this because I want you to be exposed and know that you can get more, but I also want to give you this structure because I don't want you to be like that. And deep down there was a part saying, look, I don't want you to be like me.
So which were you? Were you the best friend or the disciplinarian?
Or the worst disciplinarian. Like I was the guy that I'll have you in itis off of ice cream, or I'm going to have you shaking in fear because of the punishment.
You mentioned
it was
that
very rarely an in-between space for me in that moment.
I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier about you've experienced different spaces in parenting. As far as like you were a single dad, you were married in a relationship, being a dad. Which space do you feel like you were more effective as a parent?
For future references, my wife got the bomb fucking questions. But go ahead and answer that.
For future references, Spence never has to ask another question. Okay, but no, that is such a great question. And it's great because the answer I don't think is going to fit, or at least the expectation. In all of my experiences as parenting, where did I feel I was most effective? And I would say the space of parenting that I'm in now. And the irony of that is that right now, I don't have a single kid in my home. In a very real space of transparency, I'm going through a crazy custody issue with my two youngest kids. My oldest son, he's 22 right now, he's 23 end of this year. And, you know, he's like a state away from me. We have a very good relationship. So if I'm going through this stuff with my two youngest kids and my oldest son is at the house, why am I saying that right now is the most effective space of me being a parent? Is because their kids aren't here? Nope, that's not it at all. That's not it at all. And I'll reflect that to me being where I am right now. So I had, not with my other areas, but I had a pretty significant relapse in April of 2020. Okay? April of 2020. Like, literally, it was so bad that I looked up and I was like, dang, I have no place to go to but to the man I hate, which is my dad. Like, even at that age, in 2020, I think I was, 41 at that point in time. I still had a horrible relationship with my father. And I say I had it because he didn't have one. We didn't have a horrible relationship. I am the one that had a bad relationship with him. He loved me, was great, the whole nine. And being able to go be with him and actually not just try to do what I did in my first journey in recovery, which was just to stop doing something and make things look better. This now gave me the opportunity to really give me the space to just say, lay everything about you, George, out on the table right now. The good, bad, and the ugly. So I go through this process. I build my business. I build income. I get to the space of being able to move. And I move. I remember very clearly. I had a conversation with my ex-wife about my goals. Because for her, she says, well, you know what? I mean, now you got your own space. The kids can do this. The kids can do that. I can have them up there whenever you want them. And I had to pause her. And I said, for this year, my only focus is my health, my spirituality, and my business. And the response she gave me says, well, wow, that's a pretty privileged place to be. And she didn't say it in a nice way. And the reason why I'm saying this, though, and why now is the most effective space of me parenting, is because I made for the first time in probably ever in my life myself the priority in a healthy way. Even though today I have less engagement with all three of my children, like I can remember the space when I had all three under the same roof. And now that'll happen probably twice in the course of a calendar year, where I get all three of my kids under the roof at the same day at one time. It'll probably happen like 2 times out of the course of a calendar year. But why is this the most effective space? Because I'm finally able to parent from the most healthiest position of George. So all the parenting I did before, no matter how it looked on the outside, I used to thrive on how it looked on the outside. Like it was nothing more than I because of how I always felt emotionally about me, the fact that people would look at me and give me this level of quote unquote praise because, oh my goodness, you're a single dad, not a single mom, and you're taking care of your child, and I see you doing this, and you know, I know you went through this, but you're still doing this with your kid, and the whole nine. I never still put myself as a priority in a healthy way. I never allowed myself the space to actually just grow as an individual and find the best me. I knew how to try to be the best dad. I knew how to try to be the best partner, but they were always inconsistent and short-lived. And when I found the space to learn how to be the best me, which is still always a work in progress, but once I got real good at made some real headway there, my whole parenting dynamics changed. You know, this past summer, I had my kids here, and I laugh about this a lot. One, this is the first summer. No, not the first summer. But this summer, there wasn't any discipline, if you will. It is not from the space of saying that, and I'm going to be nice to our listeners right now, because this is things that we say in the back of our head for those of y'all who are listening. It wasn't like I said, I'm going to raise my kids like these white folks raise their kids. And I'm going to sit up here and go to timeout and no real punishment and all this kind of stuff. No, because I focused on me and I was able to bring the best of me, well, then the priority remained the same, still in a healthy way. What is it that George needs in this moment? So even in regards to parenting, by me placing the healthiest version of me as the priority, everybody around me wins. They all get something good out of that process.
I love that.
My oldest son, who I told you before, had the worst dynamic, I think, of me parenting. He jokes about it today. He's like, wow, Dad, they can just say that now, and you're good? You not even want to, like, flinch at them right now, Dad? Like, I know I would have already got back in. He says it in a joking way, but that's very much who I was.
That's beautiful.
Whereas now my children can look up and actually have the freedom to do things they never had the freedom to do before, like make a mistake. Like, my kids are free to make a mistake around me. My kids are free to experience life around me without this preconceived border area that I give them, and I let them. I want to experience them now to see, where did you go? Where did you build into, and why did you build into that space? So even though today may look like, unfortunately, I guess the typical black father dynamic, kids with mom, and I see them on the summers and holidays or whatever, and oldest son is out of the home doing his thing. Because of who I am as an individual, it allows me to be, at this space, the most effective parent. And the beauty of it is that my parenting isn't over. I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 3 years. My baby girl is 11. My youngest son is 14. So everywhere from the space of 7 to 4 years, I have no idea what's happening. But what I do know is that instead of it being 4 to 7 years of me trying to be the best dad, and I have worse consequences that I have to deal with for me as an individual, I still get to practice on being the best me, which inherently makes me a better father than whatever the last iterations they had of me. So in the space of building myself, I found the capacity to experience my most effective parenting.
I have 2 last questions. I don't know if my wife has any more for you.